This podcast is intended as education only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Welcome to the ReMed podcast, where we redefine the meaning of health and aim to change as many lives as possible through natural medicine. This podcast aims to bring you inspirational stories of patient transformations, the expertise of our own team of naturopaths and nutritionists, as well as the latest in functional medicine. I'm Toni Chambers, clinical nutritionist with ReMed, and your host.
So today I have with me a nutritional therapist, educator, and author of the book Heal Endo, Katie Edmonds. I'm so excited to connect with you and have a chat to you about endometriosis today, Katie.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Let's start with your journey. I'm not a massive fan of that word journey, but if you can kind of take me through your experience, I suppose, with endometriosis in your own life.
Yeah, it's kind of a long, like a thump, just like a dictionary in front of me that big, right? Like all of us have these long journeys. So I'll just keep mine short. My pelvic pain came on so fast. It was actually just during sex. I felt like my uterus exploded. That led me to seek a diagnosis, and I actually live on a very small island. So weirdly, our healthcare here isn't that good, but our doctor sees like all these different cases of things. So she immediately was like, this sounds like endometriosis. And I was like, no, it doesn't. I don't have painful periods. Like, I checked with Google. I definitely don't have endometriosis. She's like, okay, well, let's get some imaging. And yeah, so then I ended up having suspected endometriosis. And I was really confused because my symptoms were kind of pelvic pain all the time. It just like came on one day and it didn't go away. So I was very surprised with that. Except at my periods. I never had painful periods. And to this day, I've never had a painful period. So, I was learning what endometriosis was. And at the same time, I didn't realize it. I was actually learning a lot of stuff that was absolutely not true about endometriosis. Stuff that we've thought endometriosis is for decades. And it's stuff that people will still read today, what endometriosis is. And so, I was learning it was a hormonal disease. And I thought, okay, well, I just have way too much estrogen. Estrogen is my issue. And so I worked for years to destroy my estrogen, obliterate it, so to speak, thinking I just had way too much. And I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, all my symptoms pointed to profoundly low estrogen. I had very, very low estrogen, even lower progesterone. But it was kind of working through all these things I thought endometriosis was. I went the kind of holistic path, which at the time is, if you remember 15 years ago, it was like, oh, endometriosis is associated with toxicity and liver issues. You just need to do cleanses to get rid of your endo. And then it came to surgery. You just need a surgery. And I couldn't afford an excision surgery. I live in Hawaii. There's not a single specialist in the state. So I was looking at $50,000 or $60,000. So it's kind of this point of hopelessness, and this whole story turned around when I actually started to research endometriosis. And I was surprised. I'd just been reading blogs and hearsay for so long, and finally I got so mad. I was like, why don't I just read PubMed, start reading some research? And it was within the first day. I was like, oh my God, endometriosis is not a hormonal disease. It's not just based on hormones or female reproductive issues. And I saw it behave so much like an autoimmune disorder that I started to say, okay, well, I know what an autoimmune disorder is. Maybe if I start to treat my own endometriosis like that, we can have some success. At the time, I just wanted to get pregnant. And actually, in the process of completely changing how I was treating myself and treating this disease, I accidentally found a place of remission, which I had no idea was possible because, well, no one ever talks about it. There's this terrible tagline, there's no cure. And it's like, well, there's no cure for viruses either, or cancer, or autoimmune diseases, but we can't make that our tagline because what we need to say is, I need to find remission, or I need to find an incredible quality of life based on what I've been given. So finding remission to me was like, oh my gosh, I've hit the jackpot. But the question came up, is this just me? Am I an anomaly? Or how does this work? And that led me to write this book, Heal Endo, an anti-inflammatory approach to healing from endometriosis. And what we find is no, many, many, many women heal from endometriosis in a variety of different ways, depending on their body, the type of endo they have. But it kind of cuts through all of this this bias and the dogma that exists in certain circles that you only get rid of endometriosis, quote unquote, get rid of it in this one way. You only get rid of it with the surgery. That's all you need. You only heal with it with holistic stuff, and that's how you get rid of it. And we have to say that's not how endometriosis works. It is a chronic illness, very similar to things like cancer and autoimmune, and I even relate it to acne for many people because it's easier to understand acne for those who haven't dealt with autoimmune or cancer in their lives, and start to look at it through a new lens. And that's that's my short story.
So many questions. Yeah, so many questions from that one answer. If we can go back to your journey, I guess, when you started to have that, when you started to have the pain, were you already a nutritional therapist, or did that no, did that inform your desire to become a nutritional therapist?
Yeah, I thought I was healthy. So I was 24 and I was doing the thing where I was like a low-fat vegetarian. And I was like, that's healthy. And I also drank abundantly, as like a young 20s person can do. I was high levels of stress, super active without much restorative anything. So I was looking back on it, I was like running on fumes, but I thought I was healthy because I was fit. I could run like 10 miles. And then I would eat French fries, and it was like mac and cheese with broccoli was my health food. I like to joke because I like got the broccoli in there. Anyway, so no, and it was actually putting together the nutritional component was very helpful. The first thing I did was follow this thing called the Endo diet, which is like cut out every food you like. And I thought, well, okay, I'll do that if it gets rid of this pain. And it kind of helped, but that kind of led me to develop an unhealthy relationship with food, thinking, well, I just need to cut out something else, because I did have 30, 40, 50% improvement in my symptoms. So if I cut out more, maybe I can have 100% improvement, which is absolutely not the direction you want to go. But it was eventually when I started treating it as more of an autoimmune disorder, and my goal stopped becoming restriction and it was infusion. We actually are very nutrient deprived, right? To the very, very undernourished. And I had extreme deficiencies in a wide variety of nutrients that almost everyone with any chronic disease will have, right, across the board. So it was the infusion that actually brought my body back to life. It reversed my chronic fatigue. It reversed and brought my period back. So many different factors there. But yeah, it was eventually my success with nutrition that led me to become a nutritional therapist.
And a lot of women, it takes them a very long time to get a diagnosis, doesn't it? It doesn't just happen like that. They're often kind of dismissed by the medical kind of fraternity initially. Is that your experience?
Definitely. I joke that we should have a coffee book table, like the doctors say the darndest things. What women I'm sure have told you that their doctors have said to them.
Yeah.
And it's you're part of the situation of the 7 to 10 years diagnosis on average, and maybe it's longer for some people, is that endometriosis it behaves differently. So it's people like me who have zero period pain, but they have gastrointestinal issues. They can be misdiagnosed with IBS for a long time, with their gastroenterologist not realizing some of their worst flares come during the menstrual cycle or ovulation, right? They're just completely misinterpreted. You can also just not have period pain or even that bad of pelvic pain and have endometriosis. So, but it's that thought that it's only period pain. And just so many doctors, they're ill-equipped to diagnose it. I put it in my book, the specific numbers are in my book, but it's something like 50% of gynecologists don't feel comfortable diagnosing endometriosis. And it is a very common, it's not uncommon. 1 in 10 is not uncommon. And they're gynecologists. They're not even family practitioners. So it just shows that there's a lack of awareness in the doctor and the medical community on exactly how to diagnose. So it's very unfair.
Absolutely. So what about, I guess, again, starting from scratch as far as what is endometriosis, and your answer might include what it's not. You did touch on it initially a little bit, but
Yeah, so I think it is actually good in a way to start with what it's not. Endometriosis is not a period problem. And a period problem would be a problem. It's like a symptom that comes with your period. Painful periods, back pain during periods, really heavy periods. It's a symptom, and that can be a symptom of endometriosis. But stopping periods doesn't necessarily stop endometriosis. And it can help symptomatically in a great number of cases. But when you look at endometriosis as just a period problem or just an estrogenic issue, you are missing like a huge part of the picture. So what endometriosis is, I've referred to these already a few times. It is an inflammatory condition, inflammatory disease involving immune dysfunction, and it behaves very similar to diseases such as cancer, autoimmune, and acne. And if you imagine a scale of inflammatory diseases, and say like on the left-hand side is the more benign to the right-hand side, which are like extremely serious, you could have like acne or psoriasis on your left-hand side, they're not going to kill you. They can be very irritating. And to the right-hand side, advanced complex cases of cancer or autoimmune diseases. So endometriosis can actually be anywhere on that spectrum. It can be like benign. You may not even know you have it until you get your tubes tied. And you've had your babies and you've had your fertile life, and your doctor's saying, oh, you actually had endometriosis. Did you know? And you're like, no, I never had symptoms ever. So that happens all the way to the right-hand side, where you can have, your organs fused together. You can have endometriosis of the brain. You can have your ovaries stuck together called kissing ovaries, your bowel adhered to your pelvic sidewall. There's all these different things that can happen. On a side note, can you hear the weed whip that's outside? Is that ruining?
No.
Okay, it's so loud, and I just. So when we look at endometriosis similar to these diseases, there's other things too that coincide. One is there's a bunch of different types. So there's over 100 different types of cancer, over 100 different types of autoimmune, and there's over 65 different types of endometriosis. Again, how you can have this wide spectrum of how it affects you and why it moves so fast in some people and is slow growing in other people. And it's also multifactorial. And that means there's many factors that go into developing endometriosis. There's not one thing. And this was my problem before. And a lot of practitioners and patients alike focus on the one thing, the estrogen, just the estrogen. Or like I said, that liver detoxification issue. There can absolutely be an estrogen equation in some patients, and definitely a toxicity component. But it's more like there's a straw that broke the camel's back to a certain extent that turned on endometriosis, but there was a pile of straw there before, and there's a lot of issues going on. So that's where it falls into this chronic disease boat. All these chronic diseases are based on inflammation gone awry, so your body's immune system attacking too much where it shouldn't be, and that progresses the disease.
And you mentioned earlier as well about that kind of link with gut symptoms. I see that a lot in my patients.
Yes. Yeah. So, with endometriosis, we have a slang word for it called endobelly, and it doesn't mean anything. It's just the significant bloating that can occur with endometriosis. And it's like really significant. Did you have endometriosis?
No, I haven't.
No. Okay. Well, I had it. And I look kind of like a pot-bellied elf, like kind of like 4 or 5 months pregnant. And it's this like intense bloating, and it can come and go. So that too is multifactorial. It can be due to lesions, endometriosis lesions and the inflammatory environment that they can create or foster in the pelvic cavity can lead to things like bloating and GI issues. But just as much a factor, it appears to be bacteria and dysbiosis. And it's something like 93% of women with endometriosis talk about GI issues, but only around 30 to 40% potentially have bowel endometriosis. So there's this whole other factor. And when you start going down the dysbiosis realm, I have a huge chapters on this in my book. You find that women with endo are like pretty much colonized with inflammatory groups of bacteria from the mouth to the gut. We have the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and the entire reproductive tract, including the fallopian tubes, the cervix, the endometrium, the vagina, even the peritoneal fluid, which should be pretty free and clear of bacteria, right? That's like where your internal organs exist, and they should be in this nice, clean, immune-rich fluid, but we have bacterial populations overgrowing there as well. So bacteria becomes a huge focus for a lot of patients that, that's necessary for healing, and that can dramatically contribute, obviously, to GI issues.
And you did speak about estrogen with your case, and estrogen, it is important, isn't it? Like you mentioned, not as a causative factor, but as a sustaining factor. Would you agree?
So endometriosis is estrogen dependent, and that means it depends on estrogen to grow, but that doesn't mean that, I think a lot of people confuse this, an estrogen dominance versus estrogen dependent. They're different words, but they start with the D. So when you hear it's an estrogen dependent disease, you think, oh, it's an estrogen dominance. I have way too much estrogen. So it's different words. The dependence is just that it's like endometriosis has cells or cellular receptors that signal for it to grow. It comes from its original form, the endometrial cell. It's very similar to it, but acting quite different. But that's what your endometrial cell does. It is informed to grow with estrogen, and then progesterone cools it down right after you ovulate. So with these endometriosis cells, some of them don't grow very fast, and they don't have that many estrogen receptors, maybe a normal amount. But some endometriosis can have up to 140 times more estrogen receptors, which you imagine, like if you even have normal levels of estrogen, that can be a grow mentality. And then if you have excess levels of estrogen, and this is where the hormone equation is very important to talk about, because then we have estrogen dominance and excess estrogen on top of that. You're just kind of fueling the fire in a lot of different ways. So it's important to look at.
And if we can turn to solutions now, and that's a component obviously of your book, you're wanting to help people. What about the dietary component? Can you talk to me about the diet? I know people are different and they respond to different things, but generally, what diet do you feel really helps people with endometriosis?
So I would take out the word diet, because I feel like it leaves us with some strict rules. I say there's generalized rules we can all follow, and it's challenging. I'm translating my book into Spanish right now, and so I'm definitely dealing with, I don't want this to be like a specific set of foods that you need to eat, because people around the world who get this information should all be able to apply it to their own cultures and lifestyles and circumstances. So the general rules that I find through research is, one, reversing nutrient deficiencies. We are so likely to have these nutrient deficiencies that can actually support progression of the disease. And an example is antioxidant deficiency. So antioxidants, they stop inflammation. And the inflammation and the free radicals that are surrounding the inflammation, they are a huge part of endometriosis progressing into worse forms of disease, developing scar tissue and adhesions, you name it. So the only way to stop these guys is through antioxidants. You have their pro-oxidant species causing damage. Your antioxidants, they stop them in their tracks. And in my book, I illustrate it as ninjas. The free radicals are ninjas. Your antioxidants are handcuffs. So there's tons of research showing that we are actually deficient in antioxidants. Maybe we were deficient to begin with, and it contributed to pathogenesis. Maybe it came after, and our high levels of inflammation are actually draining us, because you might eat the same amount of antioxidants as your sister who doesn't have endometriosis, but you would be deficient because you need so much more. So the research looked at some antioxidants we might need 54 times more than the average person, which is a huge amount. So antioxidant-rich diet is important. And we have nutrients that aren't considered antioxidants, but they're essential for the antioxidant system. Nutrients like iron, right? And us with endometriosis have been found to be so deficient in iron. Even like our stored iron, our ability to move antioxidants around the body depends on iron. And so does our energy levels, right? Like our fertility, our brain function. And so many of us are dealing with things like chronic fatigue, like muddy thinking, fertility issues. And, I think you'll appreciate as more of a functional medicine and naturopath person, I was dealing with chronic fatigue for so long. And I went to the doctor, and they tested my iron and my ferritin was at 11, and they're like totally normal. Yeah. So I went for years thinking I was totally normal. And as I learned, actual values, and thought, well, it should really be over 50, maybe more towards 70 as a menstruating woman. And once I reversed my iron deficiency, I felt like an entirely new person. But this happens all the time with the endometriosis population, saying it's based on just these weird analyses of what's normal versus what's optimal. And like, it's normal for a lot of people to be iron deficient. So you're in a normal range.
Yeah. And it's the most common nutrient deficiency in the world, iron deficiency.
Totally. Yes, and that's so it's these things that can absolutely change your life. One nutrient, and then imagine a variety of nutrients. I think about it like you can have a drip of some water if you're dehydrated, and that's helpful. But what if you throw in a whole waterfall, right? You're not going to be dehydrated of these nutrients anymore. So we have all these. I list them in my book under the Endo 9, but as you know, in dealing with nutrition, there's so many more than 9 nutrients. But if we follow nutrients through food rather than supplementation, we're honestly doing a really great service to our body. And this is where we can follow a basic set of nutrients, but turn it into our plates rather than I'm taking 9 different supplements. Because when you eat foods like liver that are high in vitamin A and iron and zinc, then you're also getting B vitamins, right? You're also getting choline. You're getting these nutrients that I don't talk about in my book, because who would ever read a book that lists every single nutrient in the world and how it's associated with chronic disease or endometriosis? But you get all these coinciding things. So it's about changing your lifestyle to incorporate the most nutrient-dense foods most of the time. So that's my number one component that I like to talk about with diet. The second thing I like to mention is blood sugar regulation or dysregulation. And endometriosis is very much like cancer in how it behaves when interacting with insulin and glucose. So if you've heard that sugar feeds cancer, it's the exact same thing with endometriosis. And without getting too into the science of it, it has to do with its metabolism, that when there's a lot of insulin and glucose in the system, the endometriosis has a wonky metabolism, part of its, epigenetic weirdness, and it creates lactic acid, a huge amount of it. And your immune system can't seem to see through these lactic acid cloaks. I call it like an invisibility shield. So it allows the endometriosis to stay, right? Your immune system should be cleaning up endometriosis. It should be cleaning up an endo-like cell. It's not, for whatever reason, and this can be part of the equation. So it's like this blood sugar imbalance fuels the endometriosis growth and the allowance of it to stay, just like cancer. So you can think sugar, and it's not just sugar, right? It was just a misnomer, because I was there. I was like, I don't eat any sugar when I went healthy, but oh my God, everything was sweet, and it was honey sweetened, or like I was, like I said, I was in the low fat world. So if you're not eating fat, you're eating sugars on the bystand. So just learning more about that. And then the very last thing is what I think the endometriosis diet is known for, and this is restriction. And what I like to talk about is an elimination diet, just for trial and error, because a lot of us do react to very certain foods. There's kind of the bigger ones, the more likely to react to ones are things like gluten, dairy, and eggs. So those are things that are questioned. They're healthy. If you're eating a fermented sourdough bread, that's like a healthy food. If you can tolerate it, eat it. Same with dairy. Dairy can be incredibly nutritious. If you can tolerate it, eat it. And eggs, they're like my superfood. I loved eggs. I can't tolerate egg whites. So unfortunately, I've tried to reintroduce them, and I can't do it, and I have to be okay with that. But at the end of the day, your focus should never be restriction. If you need to do an elimination diet, or if you have severe gut issues, it may be a little more significant of an elimination diet, like a low FODMAP diet, or maybe you're doing like a strict paleo AIP diet for a little bit, but it should never be the focus. And your end goal is to reintroduce as many foods as possible, right? You want to be able to eat the rainbow if you can. Maybe you don't like certain foods, you don't want to eat them, but you want to be able to eat them. So that's kind of my triangle of endometriosis diet perfection. And then you get to play around with that based on your community and where you live. Because where I live in Hawaii, I'm going to have way different food opportunities than someone who lives in Australia or Nicaragua. And we just have to do the best that we can with our situations at hand.
Do you ever consider supplementation if someone's very nutrient deficient just in the short term, or if their gut function's really not working optimally? Do you kind of consider that initially?
Totally. Yes. It's hard, it's hard being on podcasts and I guess not being able to explain to people, because I was in the boat, at one point I was taking like 35 different supplements because I had quote unquote read that they would all do things for me, and they would all do certain things for certain people at certain times. But I was, self-diagnosing, saying, oh, just another supplement will help. I need so much help, so maybe I need all these supplements. And so it's a really fine line, right, to take and you have women taking so many sometimes and actually affect their cellular, can reverse their healing process, because it's like too much burden. So I like to say food first, and then supplementation as you need, as well as coming off of them when you need. Great one being zinc. Like, really, so many of us with endometriosis are so deeply deficient in zinc. There's research saying it could actually be used to treat cases of infertility for many endometriosis patients, that we might be infertile because of our zinc deficiencies more than our endometriosis. So something like zinc, you don't want to be on zinc forever, right? Because it can knock all of your other minerals off balance. But if you can target zinc with supplementation for a number of months, while you're also healing the gut and allowing the body to absorb zinc better, and then come off it, that's one example. But yes, and another one actually is antioxidant supplementation, which is a little bit, you really need high quality supplements if you're going to buy antioxidants, because the storage and the shipping of them can just kind of render them obsolete by the time you get them on the shelf. But I still deal with painful ovulation cramping, and it will affect me for like 2 days, and I feel it. So I've worked with creating a cocktail. I take vitamin E, vitamin C, and resveratrol and zinc 4 days before I ovulate, and then during the day I ovulate, and then I have zero pain whatsoever. And to get that much antioxidants into my body with food would be like really hard. It would just be, it's a lot for us women. I watch my husband eat. Now that I'm not breastfeeding or pregnant anymore, I'm like, I just can't eat that much food. So supplementing in those cases, and if you are dealing with something like period pain or certain painful times in your life, loading up on antioxidants before that painful event, it saturates your entire body with antioxidants that are ready to take on those free radicals the second they start to cause pain. And you can reduce your pain hugely. For some of us, a great percentage, some of us completely, depending on what you're taking. But in those, that's another case of, supplements can be extremely helpful. I'm not anti-supplement. I just like to say food first,
And targeted supplementation, not just kind of Googling and taking everything.
Don't be like me in my late 20s.
What's your view, Katie, on surgery and medical intervention?
Absolutely necessary for some people. And it is an important message. I think you probably have a very holistic minded clientele, anyone who goes to a naturopath, and I do as well. My focus is on nutrition. So a lot of people who the first thing they search is nutrition, they're saying, I don't want surgery, or I hope to not have a surgery. And I like to flip the script, because it's very possible you'll need a surgery. So I kind of said, well, don't put that barrier in your mind. Say, maybe I'll need surgery. And, there's stories of women who have gone from diet to diet to diet, 40 different practitioners, 40 is a lot, maybe like 10 different practitioners, and they just still feel awful, and they have surgery, and they remove so much endometriosis. They take apart scar tissues and adhesions. Their digestive tract starts to work again. Suddenly their SIBO treatment works because their intestinal tract has motility. Their periods aren't painful, and symptoms just disappear, right? Because the endometriosis lesions, it creates a microenvironment of its own. So, I say endometriosis lesions produce bad things. So if you have a lot of endometriosis lesions and they're producing tons of histamines and they're swelling, and you have all these inflammatory immune factors and swelling and everything in your internal organs, like, you might just feel awful until you get those lesions removed. So excision surgery, I think, should be a tool in the back of everyone's mind. Some people might need it way sooner than others. Some people might be able to wait. I never had one. And why I kind of lump that into two things. One, I got diagnosed very early. And then two is part of it, I think, is a luck of the genetic dice, that some people have endometriosis that may be easier to treat holistically or integratively. And some, like, imagine the 140 times more estrogen receptors. Well, and someone, what if that started when they were at first menses when they were 12, right? Like, they might just be dealing with so many issues that they need to have that excised for complete healing. So the type of treatment I talk about is not holistic, which I think would be like diet and lifestyle only. It's called integrative, and that's just integrating all of the tools that you need in order to feel better and get better. And that might absolutely involve an excision surgery. It also might involve hormonal birth control. And that's, it's kind of like a big thumping ground of birth control is so bad for you. You see it all over women's health sites and holistically minded sites. The research is out there. It's absolutely true. There's a lot that can happen from long-term oral contraceptives, and we need to be aware of that. I call that meducation. We need to be aware of how medicines do affect our body. But when it comes to endometriosis, it might control someone's endometriosis symptoms to the point they feel like they don't have it, or they feel like they can get on with their life. I'm a huge fan of recommending even like 6 months of oral contraceptives if your periods or your menstrual cycle is debilitating, because it's very hard to get ahead, even holistically, if you are undercut every 3 weeks. It's like you can never really get your feet back under you before you have these big episodes. Or if it starts with ovulation through your whole luteal phase, that's 2 weeks of your life that you just can't seem to get ahead of things. So I think birth control is a good consideration for some people. It always goes back to, for certain people, this may work, which isn't cut and dry the way we hope to say you do A, B, and C if you have endometriosis. It's saying we need to find your unique issues if you have endometriosis, and then we need to use you as a patient-centered care. We use you as the patient to give you the care you need based on your symptoms and your endometriosis. So, depending on the person, I say, let's be open to anything for the sake of just getting better.
Absolutely. And I like your term of integrative, because we can't just, even as a clinical nutritionist myself with a naturopathic philosophies, we have to work, we work with doctors all the time, and there is a place for everything. And Absolutely. You're right, it's about the patient and what is going to make their life easier.
Yes.
So yeah, no, definitely that's our philosophy as well. You mention as well in other interviews I've heard you do about the things that people can do already, like things like movement that can really help, like the diet, obviously. But can we touch on the movement that's available to everyone at no cost, but can make a big difference?
Yeah, and movement it's important for everything, right? Like moving nutrients around your body, like getting your energy. When I didn't exercise for so many months because I had small children and I felt like just a rock on the couch, you need to move to get the energy, but then it becomes this cyclical issue. You have a chronic illness, you probably have a lot of inflammation, you don't have the energy to move. And then with endometriosis, if you have, I'm going to say that type of endometriosis where you're very symptomatic, moving can sometimes be very scary because it's possible that it could cause a flare. So I like to say there's a huge difference between movement and what we see as exercise, like the HIIT classes online and the exercise we think we need to do. Even yoga, I say do not do any yoga that's not restorative, because it requires core strength, that if you don't have it and you're using core dysfunction, you can actually produce flare, you can hurt your pelvic floor. So the best thing that's free to everyone, no matter where you are, is really walking. And it seems silly for a lot of people that don't have that walking culture in their life. I luckily did. My mom was an avid walker, and her mom before her. It's one of those things that even if you have an injury, you can usually walk. If you have the running injury, you can still walk. If you have a shoulder injury, you can still walk. And if you have endometriosis, you can still walk. It's very unlikely to cause a flare unless you're doing some sort of intense hill walking and it's damaging your pelvic floor. But gentle walking is an excellent way to start moving nutrients through your body, moving blood through your body, and reducing inflammation. The other thing is avoiding specific sitting positions for too long. And you might think you don't sit too much, think, I just have a desk job for, 7 hours or something I sit. But like sitting involves driving your car, sitting on the couch, sitting at the dinner table. We're not necessarily sitting cross-legged or sitting in all these different positions a population without chairs would sit. We sit in a chair-like position for the majority of our days. And even if you exercise like an hour a day, which who's really exercising a whole hour a day? Like not a lot of people. That's still something like 6% of your waking hours. And the rest of the time, what are you doing? Like, are you standing or are you sitting? It's a very limited amount of movement. So, so avoiding sitting for long periods. And if you have to sit, I say, this is what the research actually I found in my book. It cuts off sitting cuts off the circulation to your glutes, which is directly attached to your pelvic floor. So if you are sitting, you're basically, you could think of that as you're bringing inflammation to your pelvic floor, and the area that potentially you have lots of endometriosis lesions, the inflammation is what, provokes the disease. So instead you can stop that blood loss, but you have to get up for every 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes that you lose blood to your derriere. So you and me, I don't know, we're going on 20 minutes or something. Like our pelvic floors are suffering. But if you can set your timer for 20 minutes, and if that seems really soon, because it does come up quick, even 30 minutes. So, twice an hour, set your timer and get up and move, do butt clenches, do mini squats, whatever. 2 minutes will bring circulation back to that area. So if you have to sit, give yourself some grace, but set your timer for 20 to 30 minutes. And that can be helpful. And the research does show, this isn't just a random recommendation, but that movement and exercise decreased endometriosis pain more than painkillers. Wow. So it's not just out there, like you should do this, potentially could help, but research is showing that it can really help. And I know in my trajectory, increasing the amount of movement after I had decreased it significantly due to the disease, I had to actively increase it again. And I did start to feel a lot better.
Now, I'd like to touch on fertility. You've mentioned in our conversation that you have young children, so obviously you were able to conceive. One of my patients recently told me that the doctor told her, you have to hurry up and get pregnant as soon as possible because it'll get so bad that you won't be able to conceive. She's feeling a lot of pressure. It's very distressing for her. So what can you say about fertility when people are receiving advice like this?
Well, I'd say, first of all, as much as it's going to distress you, try to not let it distress you and laugh and remember that coffee table book of doctors say the darndest things, because they will tell every endometriosis patient that. So when I got diagnosed at 24, my very well-meaning doctor, who's super nice, was like, you might want to try to consider getting pregnant sooner or later. And I think they see worst case scenarios where people can't get pregnant. So that was like a well-meaning advice that's very stressful for a 24-year-old. He's kind of inserting himself without realizing it. And then later on, when I was trying to get pregnant and I went to a doctor on Oahu, I thought maybe they had better care. And he tells me, you should just have a hysterectomy and adopt. So, you're just not going to, if it's not happening in 2 years, it's not going to happen. He didn't know me or my endometriosis. This just popped out of his mouth. Like there was no analysis behind his recommendation to have a hysterectomy and adopt, except for maybe, I don't know, I was being, in my head, I'm thinking, does he just make a lot of money on hysterectomies? Because that's where a surgeon makes a lot of money. Like how could he recommend that to someone who wants to get pregnant? So it can be disheartening, but know that it's very common for a doctor to say that. And they could be on either side of the spectrum, super well-meaning. They've seen the worst of the worst, and they just want you to make sure if you want to have babies, you can. All the way to the other side of the spectrum, they don't care about you or your case, and they're just saying something snide. Maybe they're exhausted. You don't know. But you kind of have to write them off. And the thing about fertility and endometriosis is that 1 in 3 of us may have trouble getting pregnant. And this is where the infertility factor comes into. That word itself can be very scary, but it doesn't mean you will never get pregnant. It doesn't mean 30% of patients don't get pregnant. It means 30% of patients may have challenges getting pregnant. Infertility meaning it just takes over a year to get pregnant. So for me, I personally got pregnant after 3 years. For some people, it could be longer. Some people, maybe it's just over the 1 year mark. You would still say I dealt with infertility, but it's gone. On the other side of the spectrum, there's plenty of women that cannot get pregnant naturally because of endometriosis. We are so lucky to live in today's day and age that we have amazing things like IVF. I mean, there's so many women that have babies with endometriosis due to IVF. And I talked to my mom, and she has a wonderful group of girlfriends. She has 2 friends who both had endometriosis, and neither of them could get pregnant. They wanted to. They lived a childless life, and they did want children. So I'm so thankful for reproductive technology. There's no research to date that shows just how many women try to get pregnant and try all the different means and still can't. So I don't have those numbers, but it is hopeful to think that even if it's progressed, there's all this other technology that can help. And then for fertility too, it's one of those things that endometriosis behaves in a bunch of different ways. I think it's more important to stay on top of what your endometriosis is doing as much as you can if you do want children. because, it can be silent. It can be, you might not realize how bad it is because your symptoms aren't there. And it would just be such a bummer to say that you knew you had endometriosis for 10 or 12 years and you get to 37 when a lot of women are starting to try to get pregnant for the first time and you realize it's really advanced. So take it seriously. Take your endometriosis seriously if you want to get pregnant, but don't let it become the freak out, because that just challenges your nervous system, which is already challenged if you have endo, as we know.
Absolutely.
And have hope for sure.
No, that's good advice. Last question is about the no cure mentality that you talk about. It's really important about what our mind is doing and saying to ourselves, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That no cure thing, I just want to kick that phrase to the curb. It's like if you want to start exercising and you're sitting on a couch, you just tell yourself, I'm too lazy all the time, right? You could be lazy, but you have to say, I'm going to get off the couch and start to exercise. That's like the difference. So even though there's no cure, like I said, there's no cure for viruses, but no one's marching around with a COVID sign saying, there is no cure, there is no cure. They're saying, we have great treatments. We know better treatments and how to help people who are, dealing with COVID in different ways. Same thing with cancer. And as, research continues, there's amazing research coming out on endometriosis and treatment. And there is some, amazing treatment plans. Endometriosis should not be the catastrophe it is today. We should be diagnosed early. We should be watched over. There's great imaging now that can see many different types of endometriosis. There's tests down the pipeline to know if you have it, urinary tests, menstrual blood sampling tests. In 5 years, I hope that getting a diagnosis is easy and doctors will be more educated on it. And then we tell our bodies we are seeking remission. And this won't necessarily come easily. You don't want to put your head in the sand like an ostrich and say, I really wish I didn't have this disease. Is to say, what treatments do I need based on my disease and how it's affecting my body? Like, do I have high estrogen or low estrogen? Do I have dysbiosis of the reproductive tract? Do I have SIBO? All these different factors that go into endo. I mentioned so many of them in my book. I'm sure you talk about them at large. And just to kind of do these check marks and say, how can I get better from here? And that's such a your journey will be different if you open the doors to the journey, right? If you close them and say there's no cure, you're not getting out of that dungeon. But if you open them and start exploring, that's like the most important thing you can do with any chronic illness.
Absolutely. So Katie, where can people purchase your book? Just in the normal channels, Amazon, etc.?
Yes. Yes. And it's got to be Amazon is in Australia, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And it's there. It's there. I have a website that's pretty extensive and that's free as well. I'm online spottily at heal.endo on Instagram. But the book is the best place I would start for everything endometriosis. Yeah.
So we'll pop all of the details into our show notes so that people can access your information and purchase your book. I really appreciate your time today. You're taking some time out of the middle of your day to spend with us. So I'm really appreciative of that.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you know someone who'd benefit from the information in this podcast, please share the link and hit subscribe so others can find it more easily. Just one more thing before you go. If you suffer from hormonal issues, fatigue, digestive complaints, or your child is struggling, maybe you've self-prescribed or you've resigned yourself to a life of feeling off, please get in touch. Visit remed.com.au to see our team of qualified, caring naturopaths and nutritionists who've helped thousands of people feel themselves again. All consultations are online, so no matter where you are, we can help. Be sure not to miss the next episode.